Alrighty, it is 1:30 and this is a special meeting of the Kings County Board of Supervisors. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Joe Nevs,
Here.
Richard Valley, Doug Verboon,
Here.
Craig Peterson,
Here.
Richard Fagundes.
Here. Okay, we have 5 present. Have on your call for the pledge, but we've covered that today, so we'll move to item 2, which is unscheduled appearances. Any person may directly address the board at this time on any items on the agenda or other items of interest to the public that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. 2 minutes are allowed for each item. Do we have anyone?
We have received no written comments and no one with their hands up.
Okay. We will move to item 3, which is a public hearing, and we'll hand that over to administration.
Chairman, members of the board, Matthew Boyette, Administrative Analyst in the Administration Office. In fiscal year 1991-1992, Assembly Bill 1491 established realignment funding for certain health, mental health, and social services programs, which was generated through a half-cent sales tax, as well as a portion of the vehicle license fee state. And so in Welfare Institutions Code 17600.2 subdivision A, it actually outlined county flexibility to transfer money in the local health and welfare trust funds not to exceed 10% of the amount deposited in a previous fiscal year. So since 2001, 2002, the transfer of health realignment funds to the Social Services Realignment Trust has been requested to be approved by your board. And in Welfare and Institutions Code 17600.2 subdivision B, actually allowed for an additional 10% of health. Oh, my volume is low. My apologies. Welfare and Institutions Code 17600.2 subdivision B allowed for an additional 10% of health realignment to be transferred to the Social Services Realignment Trust due to caseload growth in mandated social services programs in excess of revenue growth. So in this particular case, cost for services and categorical aid programs. This other mic, my apologies again. Costs associated in categorical aid programs, mainly increases into the foster care and adoptions programs, demonstrates caseload expenditure growth exceeding the dedicated revenue and funds, exceeding dedicated revenue that funds the entitlement programs. So in fiscal year 2005-2006, health realignment transfer was amended to include this additional 10%, totaling 20% going to Social Services Realignment Trust. And that continued all the way through fiscal year 12-13, to which the next year in fiscal year 13-14, the health realignment transfer went back to the traditional 10%. So in fiscal year 18-19 and 19-20, a 10% behavioral health realignment transfer was added to the 10% health realignment transfer going to Social Services Trust, totaling 20% between both departments. So last year in fiscal year 2021, due to COVID-19, 1991 and 2011 realignment revenue were reduced as a result of the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. Many counties did receive realignment backfill money from the state to kind of, combat those negative effects. But it's still unclear if these, revenues will be sufficient to offset both the decrease in realignment revenue coupled with the increase in entitlement program expenditures. So as a result of those negative economic impacts, last year it was approved to have no health realignment transfer and to reduce the behavioral health transfer from the 10% to 5%. And the reduction helped public health and behavioral health retain more of their realignment funding. So the same scenario is being brought before your board this afternoon for consideration to be carried through in fiscal year 21-22. And to reiterate that again for the record, that is to have no health realignment transfer going to the Social Services Realignment Trust and having a 5% behavioral health realignment transfer to the Social Services Realignment Trust. And the transfer will happen, if approved, on a month-to-month basis from the state allocations. And it is estimated to be $129,491 for the year. And it is included in HSA's budget that we will be going over shortly. So in Welfare and Institutions Code 17600.2 subdivision C states that the county must hold a public hearing for any substantial change in its allocation of realignment funding between social services, mental health, and health as a result of funds based on the most cost-effective use of available resources to maximize client outcomes. And so reiterating again, the disparity between the mandated entitlement program expenses in categorical aid at the Human Services Agency, particularly what we see in foster care and adoptions and things of that nature, and the dedicated funding for those programs seeing a shortage. It is anticipated that without the realignment transfer being proposed today, that $129,491 would come from the general fund. So with that, the recommendation before your board this afternoon is to hold a public hearing to receive testimony regarding a realignment transfer and find that a transfer of realignment funds is the most cost-effective use of available resources for maximizing client outcomes, and approving the transfer of a total of 5% of realignment revenues deposited into the Behavioral Health Realignment Trust account to be directed to the Social Services Trust account for fiscal year 21-22. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any questions from the board? Okay. Seeing none, we will go ahead and open the public hearing at this time. Is there anyone that wishes to provide testimony on this issue, either written or in person? Seeing we don't have any written, okay, and doesn't appear anybody wishes to testify. So we'll go ahead and this time close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for discussion and action.
There are no questions or comments, Mr. Chair. Neves moves to adopt as presented.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Joe Nevs,
Yes.
Richard Valley, Doug Verboon,
Yes.
Craig Peterson,
Aye.
Richard Fagundes.
Okay, we have 5 in favor, motion carries. We'll now move to item 4, which is the final budget hearings, and over to administration.
Good afternoon, board members. Kyria Martinez, Assistant County Administrative Officer. So today I am here to present the fiscal year 2021-2022 final budget hearings. Your board adopted the proposed fiscal year 21-22 budget on June 8th. The final budget hearings are scheduled to begin right now. At the close of the budget hearings, the board will take action to adopt the fiscal year 21-22 final budget. Next slide, please. So the process to be followed for hearings is we will do an overview of the proposed final budget. We'll review our charts and then go over the department budgets in volume 1 order. Your board has packets which include the position allocations, all the added and deleted positions for the county, and the budget presentation we are presenting this afternoon. Next chart, please. Here we have some basic assumptions of the cost to the county, some significant items in this budget to note. We have a CalPERS cost of $1.4 million. This is the annual payment for both miscellaneous and safety increase this year. This is about the average amount we pay annually. We also have the Human Services Agency debt service payment of $609,550. This debt is scheduled to be paid off in fiscal year 27-28. We also have the One Solution payment, which includes the fourth $332,822 annual payment. So this is 4 out of 5 for the finance system upgrade project. This year, we're also requesting to add enhancement to our hiring system, NeoGov, in order to streamline hiring and onboarding processes countywide. The payment will add approximately $126,000 per year for the next 3 years. This year is also the second payment for the property tax system that was implemented during last fiscal year. and the annual payment of that is $119,000. This budget also includes state funding for the SB 81 juvenile project and the sheriff's operation building. Also, last year, we entered into a new jail medical contract for the jail and juvenile hall. Our contract cost in 1920 was approximately 3.7. This year, it is now at 5 million, and the annual increase is included in the proposed budget. This impacts 4 departments. 2 of those are general fund. In addition, there was an amendment this morning that was brought to your board for this contract. Also, we have minimum wage, which is not budgeted in our proposed budget, but the county is looking at also compaction issues as a whole, and so that will come from the contingencies in the year coming. So here are some basic assumptions for revenues to the county. Some significant items in the budget to know is our CDA, the Community Development Agency revenues and building permits were actually very high last year. That resulted in less use of general fund, approximately 50% decrease of the general fund contribution from the prior year. Community Development Agency has worked throughout the COVID-19 crisis to ensure the development was not slowed in Kings County. And this is a reflection through the decrease in the general fund. Also, elections received funding for the recall election this year in the amount of $546,497. When we brought the proposed budget in June, these amounts were not showing as an expense, but were showing as an expense, but there was no revenue associated. So approximately $236,000 were already accounted for in the proposed budget. And so by receiving these recall funding, it relieved the general fund budget by approximately $236,000 to the good. This year, we are also infusing the American Rescue Plan funds into various departments as presented on August 3rd, which added $2,170,512 to the general fund from public health, that recommended budget that was at net county cost. Additionally, we increased our Prop 172 funds in the amount of $2,652,453, which impacted 2 majorly funded general fund units, the sheriff and the DA's district attorney's office. Proposition 172 is a required 1/2 cent sales tax to be reserved for public safety purposes. Our public safety departments, the DA, fire, and sheriff rely on these revenues as they do make a good part of their revenues. The HDL company is an auditing operations and revenue solutions for public agency, and they have projected that our Prop 172 allocation in fiscal year 21-22 will see a 30% increase. So this is good news, but some of that increase will be one times, as HDL also projects a 19% drop in the revenue in the following year, 22-23. Taking that information into account, there's still an ongoing 13% of ongoing revenue predicted to come to the county in the future years. Again, we infuse these revenues into the proposed budget. Besides the CDA revenues that I spoke about previously, all other revenues mentioned should be considered as one-time funds. Next slide, please. Here we highlight a few future concerns. Our employee benefits, our CalPERS, the rise of rates continue to be a concern to all local governments. Also, the continued COVID-19 impacts and any economic shutdown impacts. We're still yet to see how that will look, but it is a future concern. Also, our workers' compensation expansions is also a future concern to the county. Entitlement and benefits program, we continue to see a rise in general fund contribution to the Human Services Agency. This is due to the increase in mandated entitlement and benefits programs, primarily related to the foster care and adoptions, coupled with insufficient revenues dedicated to those programs, such as the 91 and 2011 realignment. This is something administration is closely monitoring. So now we will go over the charts in the proposed final 21-22 budget. The overall proposed final budget totals is $432.3 million, or about $38.5 million more than last year's adopted budget. The general fund proposed final budget is at $314.6 million, or approximately $29.2 million more than the adopted 2021 budget. Next slide, please. So now let's take a look at our 21-22 proposed budget summary of all funds. So this chart shows the entire county budget. This chart reflects expenditure by function. Public assistance is again our highest expenditure function, as it remained that way since fiscal year 14-15, with general government at 33.3 million. Public safety is at 107.3 million. Public transportation is at 16.7 million. Health is at 55.3 million. Public assistance at 126.9 million. Education and recreation is at 5.6 million. Capital projects are at 38.1 million. And all other internal service funds, agency funds, reserves, debt service, and contingencies are at 49.2 million. Next slide, please. This chart shows the entire county's budgeted revenues for all funds. So as you can see, 232.8 million, or approximately 53%, come from state and federal sources. Property and general taxes account for 65 million, or 14% of our budgeted revenue. State and federal are at 232 million. Public safety sales tax are at 12 million. Hazardous waste tax are at 1.4 million. General taxes, property taxes are at 63.5 million. Charges for services are at 13.4 million. Other revenues are at 49.7 million. And fund balance, again, for all funds is 59.4 million. The next two charts will show, this will show general fund only. So this chart shows the expenditures, and the chart is shown again in millions. So for general government, we have 27.7 million, which is a $6.2 million decrease from last year. Public assistance at 121.7 million. Health is at 55.3 million. Education and recreation is at 3.1 million. Public safety is at 91.3 million. Debt services is at 0.9 million. And contingencies are at 15.3 million. So total charts for chart 3 is 314.6 million, which is an increase of 29.2 million over last year's budget. Again, this chart 4, it shows the revenue sources to general fund only. State and federal at 194.7 million. Public safety sales tax are at 9.9 million. Hazardous waste are at 1.4 million. General taxes at 52.3 million. Charges for services are at 12.8 million. Other revenues are at 22.5 million. And fund balance is at 26.7 million. The total for chart 4 at 314.6 million. So chart 5 shows the general fund budget expenditures at the 314 million. This chart shows the general fund expenditures for the proposed budget, which points out that 83%, or 259.9 million of the budget has little or very little discretion. We can't touch monies in that blue section. Only 54.6 million, or 17% of the budget contains discretionary programs that are subject to reduction. This includes sheriffs, contingencies, probation, district attorneys, administration, support for organization. Those are all considered discretionary funds. Virtually no discretionary funds are those departments like human services. So here we have the comparison of the adopted 2021 budget, and on the far right, you have the recommended 21-22. This is what we brought to your board on June 8th. At that time, we had a fund balance of 23.08 million, with current revenue at 276.8 million, with available financing at 299.9 million. Our expenditures at the time were at 293.9 million, with designated reserves at 6 million, and contingencies were at 7.7 million, 7.47 million, with total appropriations at 299.9 million. This slide here shows what is proposed in the budget today. On the far right, we start with the proposed final. We knew our fund balance was going to be around 23 million, which was a $6 million increase from the prior year. And again, those were due to one-time funds in 2021. Usually our fund balance lands between 15 or 17 million. So that's that pink As of last week, we ended up with 3.7 million extra in fund balance above the 23 million we hadn't proposed. So we are recommending as proposed final is to place that into contingencies with the understanding that that we are going to look for some alternative options for contingencies and reserves in the next few months. We have our current revenue at 293.8 million, that's in green. So we have available financing at 320.62. Expenditures are at 314.6 with 6 million in reserve from last year's one-time funds. So we're continuing that from the recommended budget. And now we look at the blue, the light blue in contingencies. We typically try to place 9 million in contingencies. We finally were able to achieve that last year in 2021. Last time we achieved 9 million contingencies was in 2006 at 11 million in contingencies. However, that year in 2016, 2017 was also the year we implemented the salary study. Continuing on our recommendation from June, we are still wanting to place the 6 million one-time funds into reserves. I also wanted to break down significant additions to our budget that has added to that large contingency amount, 15.3 million. As mentioned earlier, we added 2,652,000 in Prop 172 revenues from our recommended budget in June, which significantly helped our net county costs, resulting in the large contingencies because we did not add any expense to it. We just added the revenue. So if you were to remove that 2 million that we added from Prop 172, our contingencies would be at 12.7. So I would strongly state that that Prop 172 revenue is one-time monies. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, we infused the American Rescue Planning Act, the ARPA funding, throughout the county budgets. So that was approximately 2.1 million, which freed up general fund, which previously was a net county cost in June. Had we not had the ARPA funding, we would have 2.1 million that would be drawn from the general fund. So keeping that in mind, I would like to remind the board that our budget looks great today. Our contingencies look great. But had we not had those ARPA funds or the Prop 172 funds, our contingencies would be at 10.6 million. Next slide, please. Here are the general fund history by years for approximately 10 years over the growth period. So from 2009, 2010, you can see the available bold column is a steady growth pattern. In fiscal year 09-10, we pulled reserves 2.6 million to weather the recession we were hit with. It did help. And at that time, our contingencies were also at 4.5 million. So it's that first row on the top. In 2012, 2013, we infused 1 million general fund to workers' comp and liability. As you can see, our contingency dropped to an all-time low that year at 3.8. In 16-17, that year shows the highest contingencies that I mentioned earlier at 11 million. But that's also when the board implemented the salary study in which increased the salaries the following year. And as you can see in 17-18, the fund balance dropped and so the contingencies as a direct result of that. And last year in 2021, after years, we were able to set 725,000 in reserves. And this year, fiscal year, we're an all-time high of available financing at 320.6 million. We're still recommending the 6 million in reserves. So as you can see, that's the last row on the screen. Next slide, please. In this slide, we see our fund balance and contingencies side by side. In 2007, 2008, we had the highest historical gap between fund balance and contingencies at 11.2 million during the recession. In 18-19, we had the second highest gap between fund balance and contingencies. In 2021, our contingencies are finally up, so we have improved over the prior year. Ideally, you want to keep your contingencies and fund balance equal to each other, which means that ongoing revenues are equaling to ongoing expenses. The contingencies that make up 4.7% of the final budget, this means that general fund would need a combination of anticipated revenue and or savings of expenses of 11.4 million plus all the contingents at 15.3 to get back to the fund balance of 26.8 the following year. Next slide, please. So here we have the position allocation. This shows all the positions from 2010, 2011 to the current proposed budget at 21-22. So there are total allocated positions of 1,619.9 full-time employees for this proposed final budget, which is 35.2 FTE positions more than last year's budget. 11 positions were added during last fiscal year, 2021. So I'd like to note that too, that there are budget changes throughout the year. This year, the 32.2 new positions will be called out in each budget unit. Next slide, please. So we will be looking at both volumes at the same time. Volume 1 includes the narratives and volume 2 shows the numbers. Pages, numbers for both volumes will be called out for reference, and administrative staff will call out any changes from the proposed numbers, including board action, rebudgeted amounts from last year, and then changes to any position allocation. After questions are answered, we would ask for temporary due pass with a motion and a second for each budget hearing. Before we begin, are there any questions on the previous charts or any other questions?
This is the part where you start to go into each budget unit.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, I just want to start off saying, I heard a lot about this budget, and I know that Curie and her staff reached out early on to work with our department heads. And so that gives me a lot of confidence in this budget. Can I ask at this time, are there any contested budgets?
There are no contested budgets.
No contested budgets. And Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if any board members have any changes to this budget for any of their priorities that aren't already in this. But at this time, after the review of these budgets, I'm prepared to make a motion for temporary due pass of all these budget units and come back.
I'm prepared to make a second.
Yeah. Hey, Supervisor Verboen, I'm being serious. This is a good budget. And the transparency is there because all of this is online. And we all know we have to come back and vote on this publicly in one swoop. That gives the community for concerns, if any, to bring to our attention. But at this time, that's a serious motion, Mr. Chairman.
I just don't know what to do.
You did a good job.
I had plans to be here for 4 hours. Dang it. I don't know if that's, I might be out of order.
I don't think so. Mr. Spikes, is that out of order? Oh, okay.
No, I think Supervisor Verboen was very serious in his second.
Yeah, he was. Okay, we have a motion in a second. Before we do that, any discussion? Okay, with that, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Joe Nevs,
Yes.
Richard Valley,
Aye.
Doug Verboen,
Yes.
Craig Peterson,
Aye.
Richard Fagundes.
Yes.
Why is there a pause behind my name?
Congratulations. That's just a result of a lot of good work you guys did.
These
think that
people,
goes
I had
to you.
nothing to do with this completely. So
Like that.
apparently I should have just been gone and out of here when this budget's put together. You could wrap it up in 5 minutes. I like it.
The credit wasn't for you, Larry. You don't even.
Oh, I know.
He's in the back. Put him in that.
We got a little extra time. Maybe we use it to quiz Ed on the budget we just passed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We haven't had any contested budget in the past, but it's comfortable this year. And during the current climate we have, it
Yeah.
does a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, cool. And just for verification, that was a 5 in favor.
Yes.
And so the motion carries with that. So we've reached item 5, and that is adjournment. But is there any other items to come before the board before we adjourn? Record time? Seeing none? Meeting? Larry, be quiet.
Don't stutter.
I just wanted to thank and give the opportunity for Dom and Matthew to say anything before we wrapped up. Thank you.
I guess the only thing I will say, this being my first official budget with the county as an analyst here, is for all my departments out there that might be listening and watching, thank you for all of your hard work. Thank you for working with me. It's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to many more. And thanks again.
Good job. Public safety, strong firefighters. It's health. It's a good budget.
And seriously, Carrie and staff, those guys all did a great job. Even though I wasn't here, I know they did a great job.
Yeah, they did. I know they did. Yeah.
All righty then.
Man, I can't go home this early.
Any more kumbaya? No more kumbaya? None? None? All right. Right, with that, thank you all. Meeting adjourned.
I didn't even get comfortable. I know it.